I have now the pleasure and the honor to introduce our first speaker for the sessions, Lizzie Velasquez. Ms. Velasquez will share her story about finding her voice along her health journey. She overcome obstacles and turning negatives into positive actions. She was born with Neonatal Progeroid Syndrome, which prevents her from accumulating fat. Also prevents her from gaining weight, along other symptoms. This condition resulted in a lot of bullying from an early age, including being labeled the world's ugliest woman in a video when she was only 17. Instead of adhering to cyberbullies and negative labels, Ms. Velasquez has become true inspiration by creating an anti-bullying movement and continues to spread messages of acceptance, kindness, and love. Please join me in welcoming Lizzie Velasquez.
Hi, how are you all doing? You sound sleepy. How are you all doing? Thank you. I like to have a little bit more excitement because I'm like putting it on extra too, so we all got to be on the same page. My name is Lizzie Velasquez. For those of you that don't know my story, I was born and raised in Austin, Texas. I'm 29 years old. I was born with a very rare syndrome that doesn't allow me to gain weight. Now, I'm so used to giving this intro, like I just say it, but it's like different now because like you get it, like you know, I'm not like having to explain it. And I feel like I've been saying it so right, but I'm probably not going to use the right terms, so we're just going to give me a little pass on that one. I was born 2 pounds, 10 ounces. I was born 6 weeks early by C-section. I was my parents' firstborn. My sister is actually here with me right now. She's probably walking around filming because our parents require photos and videos of everything, so that's her job right now. So it's me, my sister, and then we have a younger brother. I was my parents' firstborn. The doctor said everything was great during her pregnancy, and when it was time for her to go get an ultrasound, they realized that I had stopped growing. So they said, we're going to have to do an emergency C-section, and so they did it. And when I came out, I had no amniotic fluid around me. They had no idea how I came out still screaming, but very small. 2 pounds, 10 ounces. My dad said that I fit in his hands like this. They actually had to go to Toys R Us down the street because even the preemie clothes didn't fit me. And I look back now and I tell them that I was born wanting to help like their budget because I was able to use the clothes that I wore on my dolls once I got a little bit older, and so it was like a 2-for-1 deal for them. But when I was born, the doctors had never seen anything like me before. They were very confused as to how all of my scores were completely normal. My skin was very translucent. You could see my veins, and you still can now. But everything was normal. They didn't have, at the time, they weren't able to look up on Google or look in a book and say, well, this is exactly what she has. So instead, they told my parents, take her home, but just know she's not going to be able to do anything for the rest of her life. She's not going to be able to talk. She's not going to be able to walk. She's not going to be able to crawl. You're going to have to feed her. All of these things, all of these negative things. Now, first-time parents, you would think they would, number one, say, why us? But they didn't. Instead, they said, we're going to take her home. We're going to love her. We're going to raise her to the best of our abilities as first-time parents, and we're going to encourage her that she can do whatever she puts her mind to. That's literally what they did. I have my time down here, so I'm like casually gonna continue walking this way and like peeking, and I'm blind in this eye, fun fact. So if I like forget to go look over there, I'm not ignoring you, I just like forget. Okay, back to what the doctor said. So, when my parents took me home, my dad was working part-time at a bank, and he was also student teaching. He continued working, of course. My mom was working at a daycare, but because of wanting to stay home with me and take care of me, she decided to quit working at the daycare and instead stayed home with me, but didn't want me to feel like I was needed to be kept home or alone growing up. So she started babysitting one of my cousins who's a few months older than me, and another girl who I now call my first best friend, because we both came into each other's lives when we were about 6 months old. My mom wanted me to see that I was just like everybody else. Now back then I technically had a voice, but obviously I didn't know how to use it. My parents were my voice. They were the most perfect voice that I could ever dream of. And what I love about my parents is that when it was time for them to start thinking about having another child, of course the doctor still didn't know what was wrong with me. And so when it was time for them to talk to the doctors about having another child, the doctor said, well, be prepared because your next child is probably going to be worse off than Lizzie. Now again, my parents said, God is going to give us the child that we are meant to have. And so they said, we're just gonna try to have a baby, which I'm not gonna think about and just skip over that. Yeah, and my sister came into the world, Marina. She is healthy, she's cool, she's great, she has a cough right now, but she's good. She graduated from college last May and is working with kids now, working with kids with special needs. She just actually got a promotion, yeah. Our brother was born perfectly healthy. He is a junior in college in San Antonio. He is the jokester of our family. He is the one who will always make any tense situation feel light again. Having my siblings around me growing up, we were typical siblings. I definitely milked not having to do chores. I definitely found a great reason as to why I couldn't really do anything. Couldn't do the dishes because I couldn't really see, might cut myself. Couldn't do laundry because it was just too heavy for me to take it out. I milked it and they would just be doing things and looking at me like, you could be doing this right now. Don't worry though, I do these all now as an adult. But again, as I grew older, as my siblings and I grew older, my parents started teaching us how to use our voices. My voice came to me in a different path than it did to my brother and sister. I had to deal with bullying. I had to deal with people staring at me of any age. In elementary school, walking down the hallway was really hard because I would see people staring, pointing at me, all that stuff. My dad was still a teacher at the time, and I remember watching him, and if I would see him in the hallway with my class, he would always either wave or do something silly, and it was always just like, stop, just like nod. Eventually it turned from just like waving to him doing cartwheels when he saw me. And it wasn't until a few years ago that it clicked. He was doing this because he was taking the eyes off of me and putting them onto him. Parents, doctors, nurses, anyone with someone younger in your life who you know is going through something that's hard, whether it's medically, whether it's personally, you have to start off by being their voice. They might not know how to use theirs. They might not be ready to use theirs, but their voice is there. And it's your job, it's our job to be able to start that growth, to be that foundation. Now, my voice in my medical journey is a whole nother story. Growing up, my parents took me to genetic doctor after genetic doctor, mostly during spring break, which I hated, especially because it was my birthday. And they would say, well, we're gonna get you balloons. And I'm like, yeah, but balloons in the hospital are not the same as balloons at a party. They can be, but you know what I'm saying. I would get so frustrated because I felt like I'm fine. I have a weak immune system, yes, but I'm going to elementary school, going to middle school, doing cheerleading, doing all of these other things. So when I was able to really start using my voice for them to be able to respect my decisions, I told them I was ready for a break from doctors, genetic doctors. I was ready for a break from going to new doctors, having them walk in, take a look at me, take a look at my mom, and say, so tell me, why aren't you feeding your daughter? Or looking at me and saying, now, which eating disorder do you have? What's going on? Why are you eating? First thing they would say. My mom and I became a team in these appointments, and when those times would happen, I would shut down. And she would know. It was just one look and one comment of doubting me, or the look. Patients know this look. When you walk in and you're obviously trying to figure out what's wrong with them, but as you're talking to them and looking at them, you're really just looking at them and answering and saying, uh-huh. It's that look that makes you feel like you just want to cover up because you want to tell them what's wrong with you, but you want to be looked at as someone just like them. Having these experiences taught me so many different things. I had a break from going to doctors, genetic doctors, to find out what was wrong with me. I, of course, still had to deal with a lot of different medical issues, whether it was the pressure behind my blind eye being built up too much, having to go in for surgery to have the pressure points freeze, to having total reconstruction on my right foot, to having ear surgery, to stomach surgery, to you name it, I had it. But I was able to stop from the x-rays and the staring and the poking and having to stand there and be in like a, not like a hospital gown, but something to where they could see my bones and my long arms and stare at me and touch my head. And I knew that it was because they wanted an answer. But for me, my life wasn't meant to be continued to be a question mark. I wasn't going to live my life as a what's wrong. I wasn't going to live my life as a why. There are many different reasons I could have done that, whether it was bullying, whether it was cyberbullying, whether it was being told to put a gun to my head because I'm too ugly for people to see. All of these reasons, I could have let that be my why or my question mark. But I wasn't going to allow that to happen. With the support of my incredible family, our huge extended family, my friends, our church family, my inner stubbornness, I wanted to be the person who shows the world who I am. I had no idea that this voice that my parents, this little tiny mouse voice that I had when I was little, I had no idea that that voice was eventually going to be able to be heard around the world. I never set out to do this. My parents never raised me to say, you're gonna do all this because one day you're gonna go talk to thousands of people and tell them your story. No, it started with one. They started with me and my voice. And with their help, I was able to take that, create a platform, motivational speaking, writing. My 4th book was published last summer, graduating college, buying my first home, doing all of these things that I was able to do because I learned how to use my voice. 2013, in December, I did a TED Talk. I didn't know what TED was when I was asked to do it. I actually ignored the email for a few weeks because I thought TEDx was like spam, and I ignored it, and they kept emailing me. And I was like, Dad, I keep getting this email from like TED something, and they want me to speak, and he was like, are you kidding me? It was the first Austin Woman TEDx event in Austin. And so I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. It was my last speech of the year. I usually do one speech in December, take the rest of the year off. I'm gonna speed through this story. So I did it. I was stuck in Boston a few days before speaking, travel delays, and I was panicked, and I got there, and they said, you know, you're gonna speak early. Then they said, well, actually, will you be the closing speaker of the day? I thought, yeah, sure, why not? I did it. I had to, with TED rules, you have to give them an outline 3 weeks in advance. Gave the outline, explained, I don't use outlines, I kind of just wing it. And they said, well, we need the outline. Gave the outline. The second before they called my name, I looked at the girl helping me plan. I said, do you trust me? I had only met her once before in my life. She said, yeah, I trust you. And I said, well, I'm gonna throw everything out that we planned. Went up, looked at the audience, talked to them as if they were my best friends, like I always do. Somehow, the speech of how do you define yourself came out of my mouth. Don't know how, don't know where it came from. Thought it was great, went home, put on pajamas, ordered Chinese food, called it a day. A week later, it was viral and it was everywhere. Following that year, in January, I was approached to do a documentary. Said, sure, there's a long story behind that. We weren't gonna do any documentaries, decided to do it. We did a Kickstarter campaign. I did at least 2 to 3 interviews every single day in May to help raise the funds. We hit our goal a week early, continued, went out of the country for the first time to film and speak and do all of these things. And there was a genetic doctor whose wife saw me on the Today Show. They reached out, went to Houston. I had stopped seeing doctors, finally agreed to go. We did a DNA blood test. I stayed in hospital jail for 24 hours where I was in a room. I like that y'all thought that was funny because you get it. Nobody else gets it. I had to stay in a little room with no human contact to measure stuff, and it was just like the worst. And I remember looking out of the glass just like so pathetic. Like I was being way too dramatic. It was not that big of a deal. Anyway, we did the test, we did the blood work, left. While I was in Barcelona filming for the documentary, my mom and our director sat me down for lunch, and they both looked really concerned. And I thought, what happened? They looked at me, my mom just started crying, and I'm like, what's going on? And our director said, your doctor called your mom yesterday and said that he has your diagnosis. And this was at 25 years old. I told everyone I will never believe what my diagnosis is until there's a doctor sitting me down, looking me in the eye and saying, this is what you have. Never had that moment until then. If you watch a documentary, shameless plug, A Braveheart, Lizzie Velasquez story, you can see it on iTunes. The whole process is in there. My point of all of this story is I set out wanting to just live my life and use my voice. My doctor sat me down and told me I have Neonatal Progeroid Syndrome, made up of lipodystrophy and Marfan's. Of course, my eyes, my bones, and my heart being the scariest side effects, everything is good. But he looked at me and the first thing he said was, now your mutation is this. And I stopped him. And I said, we're gonna call it my difference, not my mutation. It's the words that matter. He then told my parents that this was not, there was no way that they could have passed this on to me. And my mom started crying. And I looked over and she said, your whole life I've thought it was my fault. And I looked at her and I said, it was nobody's fault. I was meant to have this. So I hope that you take that message out with you. And remember, when you're helping patients and their families and yourself, use your voice. Remember that there's a reason for everything. There's a story behind everyone and everything. I'm no longer a question mark. I now live my life as an exclamation point, and I hope you do the same as well. Thank you. Thank you.